I can guarantee that on the board exam, you are going to see quite a few EKGs. And one of the questions that they may ask you on the EKG is, what is the first sign that you may be having an acute myocardial infarction? Okay? First thing to know is that there is a percentage of folks that have acute MIs who have a normal EKG, about 4%. Now, if you take those patients who end up having positive troponins or positive MI, and you get serial EKGs, the numbers drop. But just know that on the first EKG, there is a subset of patients, about 1 in 20, who will have a normal EKG. Now, what about the patients that don't have a normal EKG? How are they going to evolve? Let's take a look at this. And the very first change that we should see is a hyperacute T-wave. So let's look at that first EKG here. All right. Here, you can see the on EKG number 1, you have a fairly normal QRS and T-wave. And then as you start to progress with your MI, look at that T-wave. That T-wave is big. It's raising in amplitude. It's becoming more symmetric. Now, and specifically what I think is important to focus on here is that the QRS compared to the T-wave amplitude, they're almost the same, if not the T-wave being larger than the QRS amplitude. Whenever you see that, that should make you think about a hyperacute T-wave. Now, this is different than a T-wave that we see in hyperkalemia, a peak T-wave. A peak T-wave is sharp and large usually, the kind that you don't want to sit on. The hyperacute T-wave of MI, it tends to be more broad-based, large amplitude, symmetric. And then as you progress from having a hyperacute T, then what happens? Patients can flip their T-wave ultimately, which is actually a good prognostic sign, and they can start to develop Q waves. You don't see that here, but those are some of the progressions that you may see as the MI progresses and evolves. So a few more words on T-waves. The T-wave here, when we're talking about hyperacute versus normal T-wave, now notice the examples that we're seeing on the hyperacute side here versus a normal T-wave. All in all, these T-waves have about the same amplitude. What's the difference? What makes this hyperacute and what makes this normal? It goes back to the QRS. When the T-wave to QRS amplitude, the ratio is of a certain level. It's described in the literature often as 0.36 as an amplitude, versus it's just a T-wave that is in the proper proportion to the QRS. When that ratio of T-wave is big, if it's as big or almost as big as the QRS, you should start thinking about the hyperacute Ts. And I would bet that on the board exam, when they're giving you hyperacute T-waves, they're going to give you one that's about as big as the QRS. One other thing to note, in 2022, the AHA, the American College of Cardiology published a paper on an expert consensus on the ED management of chest pain. And in that paper, they do note that hyperacute T-waves are a STEMI equivalent, and it's very reasonable to activate the cath lab in the right clinical scenario. So one more example here of a hyperacute T-wave. So let's look one more time. This is your normal T-wave with a normal ratio compared to the QRS. And when you look here, you start to get T-waves where the amplitude is almost as big as the QRS. This is your hyperacute and a subtle LAD occlusion. This is your normal. All right, so be able to compare those two. What other changes do we see? So one of the most important roles that we will have as emergency physicians, one of the most important considerations when we're taking the board exam is to be able to differentiate acute MI from non-acute MI in the EKG. So what are some of those? The first is you're going to get 1 millimeter elevation and 2 anatomically contiguous leads. Well, it says 1 millimeter here. In the AHA definitions, know that in the limb leads, that's true, 1 millimeter. However, if you're looking at the precordial leads, that level of elevation goes up. Okay? You need larger elevation in the precordial leads. It changes and varies by gender. It changes and varies by age. I'm not going to go through all of that, but know that every elevation in 2 contiguous leads has to be at least 1 millimeter. And if you want to dive into exactly what the numbers are in the precordial leads, you can look them up. They're all there for you on the internet. All right, elevation usually corresponds to an area of involvement. So not only does it have to be elevated at least 1 millimeter, but it has to be in contiguous leads. So lateral leads, 1, AVL, V5, V6. inferior, 2, 3 AVF, precordial, septal, V1, 2, 3, 4. The changes that we see in the EKG should really fit one of those patterns. And on top of that, you should see some reciprocal depression in acute MI. You don't always see it, but a lot of times when you're getting questions about acute coronary syndrome, myocardial infarction on the board exam, they will give you some reciprocal changes to kind of push you that way. Otherwise, sometimes it's difficult to tell between an MI and some of the other causes that are mimics that we're going to talk about in a minute. There's one exception to the rule of having elevation in 2 contiguous leads, and that's a myocardial infarction with left bundle branch block. When they meet Sgarbosa criteria, you only need to have 1 lead. We're going to talk about that in greater detail just coming up here. And then we already discussed this, T-wave inversion. When you have it within 4 hours, so you get that initial hyperacute, and then it flips, that's actually a good prognostic sign. And in fact, when you give somebody thrombolytics and they invert their T-wave, that's a good sign. All right, and now Q waves. What can we say about Q waves in MI? Q waves start to develop. They can develop as early as 1 to 2 hours, and they can start to develop as late as 24 hours. But the important thing to know about Q waves is that they aren't these like dagger-like Q waves that we sometimes see when we talk about hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. A true ACS-related Q wave starts to broaden out at least 1 square wide and should be about 1/3 of the height of R wave. So it's a little bit wide and a little bit larger than what you're typically seeing. So a narrow Q wave is not necessarily a pathognomonic Q wave.